There's a plow sitting in a Smithsonian storage room that most visitors never even see. It's just a curved strip of old steel, polished smooth on one face from decades of dirt sliding across it. But that plow is the reason half of America's richest farmland ever got planted at all. Because before it existed, farmers were walking away from the best soil in the country. Not because the land was bad, because the land was too good, too thick, too sticky, too alive. And the man who solved it did it with a piece of metal he technically wasn't even supposed to have. In the next few minutes, you'll find out exactly what kind of dirt could stop an iron plow dead in the ground. You'll hear where the steel that finally beat it actually came from, and it's not what you'd guess. And you'll see why, almost 200 years later, the shape one blacksmith figured out by accident is still hiding inside plows made today. This is a documented story, sitting in company records, and a historic site in Illinois that still stands. It starts with the worst dirt a farmer ever tried to work. By the 1830s, settlers were pushing into the northern prairie, Illinois, Wisconsin, the edge of Iowa. The land looked like a gift. Black soil, feet deep, richer than anything back east. But every plow they brought with them was cast iron, built for the thinner, sandier soil of New England and the Ohio Valley. And this prairie soil didn't behave like that soil at all. Farmers called it gumbo, a thick, wet clay that clung to metal like wet cement. Here's the strange part, almost nobody expects. A cast iron plow blade didn't fail because it was too weak. It failed because it was too rough. Its surface had tiny pits and imperfections from the casting process, invisible to the eye, but enough for sticky black soil to grab onto. Within a few steps, the plow wasn't cutting soil anymore. It was just dragging a growing wall of mud in front of it. A farmer would stop every few yards, climb down and scrape the blade clean with a wooden paddle, then walk a few more steps, then stop and scrape again. Some records from the period describe a single acre taking most of a day, work that should have taken a couple of hours. Whole families gave up on land they'd already paid for and moved somewhere the plow actually worked. Stop and think about that for a second. The richest topsoil in the country, and it was considered unfarmable. Not because nobody wanted it, because no tool could survive it. This wasn't a minor inconvenience. This was the difference between a farm that fed a family and a farm that went under. Blacksmiths across the region tried their own fixes, smoother casting, wooden scrapers bolted to the frame, even greasing the blade before each pass. None of it held up past the first few yards of wet clay. And for years, nobody in the region had an answer. Here's the part most people never hear about, how it finally got solved. In 1836, a blacksmith named John Deere left Vermont for Illinois, chasing the same opportunity everyone else was. He wasn't fleeing failure exactly, but business back home had been slow, and word was that a growing prairie town needed a good blacksmith. He set up shop in a tiny settlement called Detour on a bend of the Rock River. What almost nobody knows is that Deere didn't set out to invent anything. He just wanted steady repair work. Deere wasn't a farmer. He repaired farm tools, and every single day, farmers walked into his shop, complaining about the same thing. Their plows wouldn't cut clean. The soil stuck. Nobody could keep a field moving. Deere had grown up around steel, not cast iron. Steel used for things like saw blades, which needed a smooth, hard edge to cut wood without catching. And he started wondering whether a smoother, harder surface might stop soil from sticking the same way it stopped wood from catching. The detail almost no one mentions is where he actually got that steel from. According to the history preserved at the Grand Detour historic site today, Deere didn't order fresh steel from a supplier. He used a broken circular saw blade from a local sawmill, steel that had already been cut, tempered, and polished for a completely different job. He cut it down, reshaped it, and forged it into the curved blade of a plow. Historians place this moment in 1837, the year the self-scouring plow first cut clean through prairie soil. What no one expected was how differently it behaved the moment it hit the ground. The polished steel surface was smooth enough that the sticky prairie clay simply couldn't hang onto it. Instead of building up into a wall of mud, the soil sheared cleanly off the blade as it moved, what farmers would later call a self-scouring plow. No more stopping every few feet, no more climbing down to scrape. A single blacksmith, working with scrap steel most people would have thrown away, had solved a problem that had stalled an entire region's farming. Word moved fast, the way it does in a small farming community where everyone talks to everyone. By 1838, Deere had built a small handful of plows for neighbors who'd seen his first one work. Here's where the story turns, though, because Deere didn't stop at one good plow. He kept refining the shape, the curve, the angle the blade met the soil at, testing it field by field. Records kept by Deere and Company describe him traveling to different farms just to watch how his plow performed in different soil conditions. That obsessive testing is part of why the design held up. It wasn't a lucky accident that worked once. It was an accident that got engineered into a real tool. Here's another detail worth pausing on. Deere reportedly kept adjusting the blade's curve for months after that first success, because good enough wasn't good enough for him. The version of the plow that eventually spread across the Midwest wasn't his first attempt. It was closer to his fifth or sixth. But that's not even the strangest part of what happened next. By 1842, Deere was producing around 100 plows a year out of Grand Detour, respectable for a one-man blacksmith shop, but nowhere near enough. Here's the rehook most versions of this story skip entirely. Deere almost didn't have the steel to keep up with demand. Grand Detour had no rail line and no easy river access, so every sheet of fresh steel had to come in slowly by wagon. Farmers from further and further away were hearing about the plow that didn't clog, and they wanted one. In 1848, Deere made a decision that changed everything. He moved his operation to Moline, Illinois, a town sitting right on the Mississippi River. That river access meant he could bring in steel from Pittsburgh by boat and ship finished plows out the same way. Picture that for a second. A single decision about which town to set up shop in ended up deciding how fast an entire farming region could grow. The stranger fact is how fast this scaled from a blacksmith side project into an actual industry. Within about a decade, Deere's factory wasn't making dozens of plows a year, it was making thousands. Company records maintained by Deere and Company describe production climbing past 10,000 plows annually by the mid-1850s. Think about what that actually means. A shape one man worked out by trial and error on a broken saw blade was now cutting into the ground on farms across the entire Midwest. The prairie that had been considered unfarmable a generation earlier was becoming the breadbasket of the country. Nobody could have predicted that the fix for one blacksmith's local headache would end up reshaping how an entire region grew food. And it didn't stop at plows. Deere's company kept building on the same core idea, smooth, hardened, precisely shaped steel meeting soil, as it grew into one of the largest agricultural equipment makers in the world. So here's a question worth sitting with for a second. How many other unfixable problems are actually just waiting on the right leftover piece of scrap steel? What's easy to miss here is that none of this was inevitable. If Deere hadn't been the kind of blacksmith who tinkered with leftover material instead of throwing it out, that saw blade stays scrap metal. The records show he wasn't trying to build a company. He was trying to stop farmers from walking back into his shop with the same complaint. And here's the detail that ties the whole story together. That plow in the Smithsonian's agriculture collection isn't just an old tool. It's physical proof of the exact moment steel replaced cast iron in American farming. The Grand Detour site in Illinois, the actual bend in the Rock River where Deere's blacksmith shop stood, is preserved today as a historic site, with the story of the broken saw blade documented on the grounds. And the principle Deere stumbled into by accident, a smooth, self-scouring surface that let soil release instead of stick, never really went away. Ask yourself where else in your own shed or barn a small overlooked fix might be hiding, the same way it was hiding in a broken saw blade in 1837. Modern tillage equipment, no-till drills, even some coatings on farm implements today are still built around that same basic idea. The surface matters as much as the shape. A problem that once made the richest soil in America look worthless got solved by a man who wasn't trying to reinvent farming. He was just trying to stop losing customers to sticky mud. It's worth sitting with how ordinary the whole thing started. A busy blacksmith shop, a pile of scrap metal, and one recurring complaint. That's the real story, documented, sitting in company archives, and a historic site you can still visit today. If you want more of these, the real history behind the equipment we drive past without ever asking why it works, subscribe to The Quiet Farmer. And tell us in the comments, is there an old piece of equipment on your land you've never actually looked into the history of?